hadn't heard saw his shadow. So there are 6 more weeks of winter, surprising absolutely no one. But today on our agenda, we have MC 10-26, which is Delegate Foley's bill to establish a system of automated enforcement for crosswalks in Montgomery County. And we have a number of amendments that have been submitted. Before we get started discussing those, I just want to say Delegate Foley expressed her regret that she is not able to be here because she has another meeting at exactly the same time. Ann Seacott, who is representing the vendor who provides the automated enforcement systems, is here on the call in case there are some technical questions, as is Chris Tippery from the county's automated enforcement division of the police department. And we have already had good preliminary discussion about this bill last week. So this week, I'm hoping that we can get into a more detailed, perhaps technical specific discussion of some of these amendments that have been submitted and decide, depending on the will of the committee, whether we want to take action on some or all of these amendments and start to consider how to move the bill forward if that's the will of the committee. So with that, I think the best way to do this is to proceed sort of sequentially through the amendments that have been presented, if everyone is okay with that. And what I have before me are sort of three sets of amendments, two of them offered by the sponsor and one offered by Delegate Moon. So maybe we can talk about the ones offered by Delegate Foley first, since we did in general discuss those last week. So you should have before you in the materials that were sent out by staff, Delegate Foley's first amendment, which consists of two changes regarding eliminating the language that would otherwise limit these systems to school zones. So this amendment would essentially say we're going to remove the language in the draft bill or in the bill that says that these systems would only be usable in a school zone. Does anyone have any comments, or would anyone like to make a motion? Yes, Delegate Moon.
So I do have questions about this. And I want to say, just from the top, I strongly support us moving an authorization for crosswalk camera enforcement. So very broadly, I do support this. But I guess I am curious if we go to remove the school zone restriction, which I think there's merit to that, are we then just leaving it totally loosey-goosey as to where these are going to be located? It seems to me the prior steps we've taken when we deploy a new photo enforcement technology is generally to authorize a limited use pilot before we move on to full-blown expansion. And if we're not doing school zones, we can talk about the walk zone outside of schools, I would wonder if we would replace it with incident, some area with incidents or something other than just wherever to guide the hand of this, as to like a limiting factor in law. And the other is whether we want to do this as a pilot versus just move straight to enabling the whole thing.
Fair questions. Director Tippery, I know, has been involved in this discussion about the reasons behind why the county wanted to remove the school zone limitation, because there are identified crosswalks with problems or additional heightened dangers that are outside of school zones. But I'm going to defer to him to kind of address that. Delegate Moon, before we do that, if we as a committee want to discuss doing this as a pilot or having some other limiting principle, I'm certainly amenable to any additional discussion or potential additional amendments that might allay some of those concerns. But let me turn it over to Director Tippery with any comments on that issue.
Yeah, thank you again for allowing me to speak in this forum. We're not limiting or not removing school zones from the areas of concern. We just want to expand it not only from school zones but to other areas of the county where pedestrian safety is. We've seen some collisions or some close calls, and would just like the ability to address those concerns as well along the same guidelines as we placed on the high incident network and reporting requirements for the high incident network. That those would be tracked on the same level that we do with speed enforcement, that it would be posted. Everybody would know ahead of time of where those locations are. But we just see a better benefit to the rest of the county and the pedestrian traffic if we could expand it beyond school zones.
So thanks. I think that Delegate Moon kind of understood that that's where you were coming from, but the question is more about how do we ensure that we're not putting a camera at every single crosswalk, every single location throughout the entire county, or having some limiting principle that guides where these are located. And I assume operationally, your division is going to want to put them in certain select places based on a review of data and other considerations, but that's not really in the bill. And if we remove school zones, that's my understanding is that's still not in the bill. I don't know if the legislative language for other types of automated enforcement includes requirements to look at high incident data to decide where you're going to put those cameras, or whether it's something that operationally the county just decides. Obviously, we do still have notice and signage requirements in this bill. So to your point, and maybe to partially allay the concerns of Delegate Moon's question, the public's going to be notified, if cameras go up in certain locations. But to the question of how do we decide where to put these cameras if we eliminate the school zone provision, and we can go anywhere in the county, is there another limiting principle that is reflected in the bill, or at least in the operations of the county? Does that question make sense?
It does make sense.
And let me frame it correctly this way too. There's going to be a lot of demand for these. And if there's no restriction in law, there's going to be an expectation created that residents ought to be able to contact their government to request that these get put in, which is also fine too. But I'm assuming that's not how this is going to work, and it hasn't been how we've operated photo enforcement generally. So I think it might be helpful to set public expectations with how we do this.
Right. It's difficult because the way that we currently do it is based on data. We go where the data tells us to go. We do traffic analysis, and we base it on the needs of the county. And it's completely data driven, including with red light enforcement. We limit the amount of camera systems so we're effective in the implementation of the program. So we do it very cautiously. Like with red light camera systems, we only add 5 systems per year, and we've capped it. So after this year, it's basically a 1-for-1. As long as the data supports the installation of the camera, then we'll place it there. Legislatively, I believe Wade Holland's on the call. Legislatively, I'm at a loss for how to articulate that. It's based on data.
Right. I mean, that's the distinction, I guess, here is whether all of those decisions by the county to limit and to be thoughtful in terms of where it locates red light cameras and speed cameras, is that really, even if it's done well, is it something that's done at the operational discretion of the county implementing its own internal policies, or is it something that is mandated by legislation? I think that's kind of the question, if I'm capturing the essence of delegate concern.
Yeah, it's basically our own internal policies where we place the speed and red light systems. We work with Wade Holland Vision Zero, who's separate from us, and DOT and SHA, and come up with a list of locations that we need to address. Speed cameras are kind of unique. We have a percentage of violators that we need to see before we install a camera. So how do we legislatively word that into stop sign enforcement?
If we decide that that's something we want to do legislatively, or as opposed to saying, through this process, we're acknowledging there's a operational policy internally at the county. If it's the will of the committee to say we want to defer to that, but we just want to make clear for the record our expectation that that policy is going to be applied in some fashion to these types of automated enforcement systems at crosswalks, or if it's the will of the body to do something in the text of the legislation to kind of confirm that. I leave that to the committee. But Wade, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on that, since you turned on your camera when Chris called you out by name. So
Yeah, thank you, Delegate Spiegel. I think one of the things we were looking at, when we were thinking about what this technology and where it would be the most safety impact, obviously school zones always comes to top of mind. The other areas we were thinking about were, we have our Complete Streets Design Guide, and we have certain areas that are designated in that, from urban all the way out to rural and everything else in between. So one thing you can also look at, like, for example, in the state code, we have residential zones are defined for speed cameras for residential zones and the posted speed limits. So you could also look at zones similarly for this legislation or pilot, saying, school zones plus, urban designed areas, or sorry, urban designated areas as well, because that would cover your Bethesdas, Wheaton, Silver Springs, Germantowns, where we have those higher violations of people not yielding to pedestrians in those urbanized areas.
okay, all right. So that could theoretically be an option as well. I see Delegate Wu has his hand up. Delegate Wu, Vice Chair Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think since Mr. Tiberi and Mr. Holland here, I have one question about between pilot program or a massive expansion, there's possibility there. I have a question about vendor selection. Do we have like multiple vendors actually they approach us, or we only have like sole vendor contract or something like that? Because I sometimes have concern about the deal we're getting or the government, because the percentage in terms of getting the fine, the split with the vendor, sometimes it's really low for the county government.
Well, currently what we do is with speed enforcement, if you remember, it's it's a fixed fee for speed enforcement systems because of the issues that came up earlier in legislation a few years back of we don't want this to be a vending machine or the contractor have any sort of benefit financially from moving those cameras to high use areas, and then they would receive a percentage of the ticket. We've mitigated that with a fixed fee, so that what we negotiate out with the vendor / contractor for the cost of the camera runs void of any percentage of a violation. So the camera would cost $100 no matter what. Every month it's $100, and they get nothing back from any more or any less. So we negotiate that fee out with the contractor ahead of time.
So how do we, like, for example, if there's anything in terms of software, for example, right? If the county say, we need some improvement, right? The accuracy is not good. How does that improvement or like a software patches going through? Like, is there an extra cost?
No, that's all it's baked into the contract essentially. So like our contract currently states that I get the latest and greatest in technology all day, every day. So if there's an updated system hardware, firmware updates, we go through those automatically, and it's all baked into the charge for the camera per month.
So how many vendors do we have for the camera type of camera system?
Just one. And
there's only one satisfied the requirement, or we just like only one company approached us?
No, we went sole source to Vitronic because they're the original equipment manufacturer that we currently use, and we did a fixed fee for speed and red light. So that way, I'm sorry, yeah, fixed fee for speed and red light. So there's no additional revenues being received by the company beyond the initial set charge. Also, for any new and emerging technology that the company comes out with, they have to give that to us for free.
Yeah, and I'll follow up that with what Chris said. That's their current vendor that's providing speed and red light. So if this were to be authorized, it doesn't exempt him from procurement rules. I mean, there's still a whole county and state procurements that has to be followed. Whether that is, I don't know the total number of vendors that provide this technology, but there are a handful. And the nice thing is we're starting to see international companies coming into the space in the US to also provide some more competition. It's not, dozens, but there are some companies now that are offering these newer technologies, and some of them may be existing vendors, but also new ones. And Chris would have to still go through county procurement to make sure whatever system would be used for stop sign would have to be either bid out or go through some sort of contracting mechanism.
I see. Thank you.
And I will just note that on page 16 of the original draft of the bill, there is a provision that basically mirrors what we have for speed cameras, and saying that the funding cannot be a bounty system. So we cannot compensate a vendor based on a sort of a per ticket model. So that is borrowed. That is language that is essentially copied from, I think, what ultimately came about with respect to the speed cameras, that is also reflected in this bill.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I see Delegate Moon has his hand up again. Delegate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you just give us a sense, because this also relates to my question about whether to rush to general implementation as opposed to a staged pilot. How many locations does this contract contemplate?
We haven't gone to RFP yet or discussed this type of technology with any vendors yet.
I see. Well, I guess so. I'm just trying to remember how we did this for the stop signs and the other things. Well, I guess the stop signs were a one city pilot, right? And then we were moving to two city.
Yeah.
And the bus patrol staging, I can't remember how we did that, but that was also a staged contract, I seem to think. There was some pilot and then it really scaled up the next year. I personally would be comfortable if we did a staged pilot authorization. It's, and it might actually reduce the need to put limiting language as to the locations if we did it that way too. Just my 2 cents on this. If folks would be amenable to that, I think that might do it. If we just say, all right, we'll try this out for a few locations and revisit it in a year or two, as opposed to having to decide now whether we need to put limiting factors in there. I mean, I guess my worry about this is, and I'm glad you put the vendor restriction in there, but I actually think the vendor is only half the problem. My greater issue is actually with the county, to be perfectly frank, because once these funds hit the general fund, you guys are not very keen on ever letting us dial back the use of these dollars once you've programmed them for whatever you want. And that is kind of why, when I look at how quickly Bus Patrol went from a tiny pilot to a full-blown, all over the place operation, and it's just been impossible to pull it back once it's in that state. I just these days am now very loath to just unleash these other things without any type of checks or controls on it. So that's my 2 cents. We can either think through on the front end, do we need to be more specific as to data? But if that's just general practice anyway, maybe we don't, but we could at least stage it with pilot language.
Thank you. I guess procedurally, the question is, do we need to have something a little bit specific about, what a potential pilot language limitation might look like? Do you have anything in particular you want to propose now? Do you want to wait till next week?
I mean, if we're talking orally, I don't know how we staged it again for the other contracts, but if we want to do a limited location authorization, like X number of sites, we'll pilot this, up to X sites for a year, something like that. I just don't know what's also feasible with how you bid something out like this. If you typically can bid it with a pilot like that.
Bearing in mind that there's going to be some lag time. If a version of this bill passes and gets implemented, it's going to take some lag time just to do the procurement, to set up, the systems before they can even be operated. So let's bake that into whatever your period of time is if you're going to be proposing a pilot. If that means 2 years or if that means 1 year after, being activated or something like that. But Chris, you look like you wanted to say something there.
Well, just to keep in mind that if it's a pilot and it's a length of time, the vendor usually has to pay for the installation of the equipment, and that's usually amortized over the term of the contract. So to keep it attractive, it would need to be somewhere between a pilot of 3 to 5 years, so that whoever the contractor is could mitigate that installation fee, in keeping with the fact that if we walk away in 3 years and the pilot ends, that that they can do so without any loss, because then it's hard to attract many people to respond to an RFP if it's very short and they can't mitigate or amortize that installation over a term of time. It kind of limits the people that will put in for their contract, which
I personally don't have a strong feeling on any of that, except to say whatever is practicable, for getting this thing out. I certainly don't want to make the program not feasible.
Yeah, and the other thought is that even if we were, and this is all kind of hypothetical at this point because the committee hasn't acted yet, but if we were to decide to limit this to some sort of pilot, even if we were to do it for 3 to 5 years, if after year 1 it became clear that this was a really effective system, there's nothing that would prevent us from coming back and saying we're expanding the pilot or we're removing the limitations on the pilot going forward or something like that. But I don't know, Chris, Wade, and I don't know if Anne, if you want to weigh in on this either in terms of representing a vendor who does this sort of thing. But is there a number out there that makes sense that we could start batting around, like 20 locations, 30 locations? What makes sense as a potential pilot?
That in terms of what Mr. Tippery said around, recouping costs and things like that, I will need to ask them what they think the right time period is. But I'll ask what the time period and number of cameras might make sense for a pilot. This is something that is just new. It's new technology. There are a number of states considering this. It's not in place in any other state at this time. So, I think looking at, what is the size of a pilot is a good question to be asking. And I will get that information to the committee before the end of the day.
We're literally the first in nation if we do this.
So I want to say, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 others. It's several states in the Mid-Atlantic region that are considering legislation right now. So it could be.
That definitely smells like a pilot then. Now that I know that, I'm a little more fond of the pilot concept.
Is there, and I would defer to Wade, is there a way that we could tie it into the Vision Zero reporting requirements that he has? I believe it's every 5 years that Wade has to report out.
Yeah, well, Chris is referencing the bill that was passed and signed by the governor last year for 2025 for the high end network. So it says starting in 2030, and then every 5 years thereafter, we have certain reporting requirements on those cameras that are on those corridors. So I think he's trying to ask to sync up the timeline. And I think in terms of pilot too, when you think about the timeline, lessons learned, we did the legislation on the noise cameras. We had to come back in the next year and extend it because it just takes, especially when it's kind of experimental technology, which this is somewhat experimental in terms of piloting it, is assuming it can be up to 2 years potentially just to get them by the time you actually start issuing tickets, by testing, vendor demos, procurements, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I'll just note that Delegate Moon already has an amendment before us that includes some pretty substantial reporting requirements. I imagine they don't line up perfectly with the Vision Zero requirements, which don't even kick in, I guess, until 2030 anyway. But that's certainly a consideration. And so we've got the current version of his amendment in front of us for consideration, which includes that language. Okay. Do any other members of the committee have any thoughts or questions about this idea of, where these cameras should be and whether it should be a pilot or anything like that? No. All right. I guess I'm trying to figure out the best way to address this moving forward. It sounds like we need a little bit more information before we can figure out what the contours of a pilot might look like, if that's the direction that the committee wants to go in. I hate to drag this out too long through the session, but I want to make sure we get it right. Maybe we'll have to come back next week with some additional information and amendment language that is more specific if that's what the committee wants to consider. But while we're all here, I did just kind of want to, maybe we don't need to take a formal vote yet, but I just kind of want to take a straw poll or get any questions or concerns or feedback on the other draft amendments that were before us. Delegate Foley has another amendment which contains a number of provisions designed to address the questions that we raised last week on making sure that signage is in proximity to where these cameras would be, similar to speed cameras, making sure that the language of what triggers a violation under the camera system lines up with the language of what is considered a violation under the existing transportation code of, what happens when a vehicle approaches a crosswalk and there's a person in it or about to be in it. So it gets rid of some of the language that was in the original bill to make sure that they line up. So violations can only be issued if you actually commit a violation under existing law with respect to crosswalks. For example, as I understand it, the existing language in the transportation article says that someone has to be either in your lane or approaching your lane in the crosswalk. So if you're in a 6-lane road and you're all the way on the left lane and somebody steps into the crosswalk on the far right lane, but they're nowhere near your lane yet, then technically that's not a violation under existing law. And Chris seems to be shaking his head, but I'm not 100% sure that that's right. But the bottom line is I want to make sure that whatever existing law is lines up with whatever type of violations would be considered violations under this automated enforcement system. So that's in the second amendment from Delegate Foley as well. And then I think there's also some language in there about removing the requirement that the Montgomery County Council has to approve of every location, because that raised concerns about whether municipalities within the county would want to authorize one of these, and would they need the county council's approval to do it in the city of Tacoma Park or the city of Rockville when they are independent municipalities. And as I understand it, Montgomery County itself, the department doesn't really think that there's a need to go back to the county council every single time you want to authorize a location for a crosswalk and automated enforcement system. So this amendment also removes the requirement to have the Montgomery County Council formally approve every location that's being proposed. I see some hands up. Delegate Moon.
Oh man, I have to say, once I started hearing that description about how the law is triggered, I'm a little squeamish now, because ideally in these scenarios, it's fairly clear. This is just reminding me of the opposite lane problem on the school bus cameras, where you seem to have a ton of people who are confused about the law requiring them to stop on an undivided highway 7 lanes away, when there's a school bus there. And the way this technology is deployed actually might speak to the triggering condition being different than the one in state law. For example, and I just don't know what the condition of the crosswalk is going to be, but if it's got a beacon on there and pylons and it's striped and elevated and someone ignores it and it's a 4 or 5 laner, I mean, it seems to me it's fair game to ticket people who aren't stopping on all 5 lanes of it if the intersection is in that condition, right? But that might not quite be the way the crosswalk rules are flagged, unless there's something about a beacon hawk crosswalk being penalized differently than one without and a flashing signal. Does this make sense what I'm saying here?
It makes sense to me, and I don't know the answer to your question, and I'm sorry that I threw a wrench into our conversation, but I just wanted to make sure everybody understood. I could also be explaining the existing enforcement law wrong, but I don't think I am, having looked at it. But one difference to consider between this and the bus stop, the school bus stop issue, is that this would not risk being what some might call over-inclusive, right? If you're in a vehicle and you're on a 6-lane road with no median and you're all the way on the other end of the bus stop and you go through, you might still get a ticket, right? But assuming that I'm right about how this works, if there's a crosswalk camera and you're on all the way on the other side of a 6-lane road and somebody steps into the crosswalk and you go through, you would not get a ticket. So it would not risk being potentially over inclusive if that's what you want to call it.
That seems under inclusive to me because in this scenario, I believe maybe I'm wrong about this technology, but the way it was explained to me, there's going to be like lights flashing, and the person who's not stopping is not stopping when the crosswalk is blinking and telling them to stop. Do I understand that correctly?
My understanding is, and we'll have Anne discuss it because she represents the vendor, one of the vendors who does this. But my understanding is there's no obligation for there to be flashing lights. It's simply a camera that will use advanced technology to see all of the pedestrians and all the vehicles on the scene and be able to make a determination using an algorithm that understands what the law is and understands where the players are on the scene. And of course, it will ultimately, I think, have to be reviewed by a human being before being issued, the same way a speed camera ticket is reviewed to determine that it does, in fact, violate the law before it gets mailed out. But I'll let Anne just either tell me I'm wrong or tell me I've got it pretty close.
I think you're very close. So yeah, I do not believe they're flashing lights per se. Speaking just for Obvio, they do a lot of community outreach and engagement. They try to work with folks in the neighborhood to put up signage. It's a brightly colored pole that is set that they install. It's solar powered. And my understanding, I don't know all the specifics, but they are able to make sure, however the technology is that camera that you described perfectly, Chair Spiegel, about it's recording what's going on, the cars and the people, by the way, with blurred out faces, pixelated is that word, and they can adjust the software in terms of what it is. What is that violation? So they obviously are going to have it match whatever the existing law is. And then whatever then the technology sort of flags as a potential violation, you're also very correct that it is then there's a human being that decides whether or not this actually is a violation.
And that also reminds me that I didn't mention earlier that in the longer Second Amendment that we received from Delegate Foley, there's also language in there just to make it absolutely clear that these systems would be subject to the same privacy rules that other automated enforcement systems are also covered by. So thank you for that. And so, Delegate Moon, I don't know if that helps or hurts your understanding of how these systems work, but there's nothing in the technology or in the legislation or amendments at this point that requires a kind of hawk signal type feature to go along with automated enforcement at a crosswalk.
Well,
That
that
doesn't mean
answer definitely helps me with my amendment, but
yeah.
it
It
does
doesn't mean that
raise
they're
this other
yeah.
question,
Go ahead. Sorry.
which is just are we as a body and a committee and a delegation ought to be able to very easily explain to the general public when they won't and when they will and will not get a ticket under one of these devices. And I will tell you, when we voted for the bus patrol cameras, I don't think the delegation understood those rules because members themselves were getting those tickets. Um, and I can't clearly articulate it at the moment for the crosswalk, how this is going to work. So I do think we ought to get a handle on not just how it would operate if we did it this way, but whether that way is in fact how we want it to operate. And again, I say this with I think we should move forward with some pilot, but it may be that we want to create something that's very understandable for when, in code that might be slightly different, for the purposes of if you're at an automated enforcement crosswalk, this is when you're going to get a ticket. And it could be that we can easily answer that with existing law, but I would just confess that it's a little murky to me at the moment.
Well,
Okay.
to me, I'm sorry. To me, it would go along with just like we do with all the other types of automated speed enforcement. Is that, like we referred to earlier, is that the image is captured showing the clear violation, and it has to be issued in accordance with state law, and then it has to be adjudicated. So if you felt that you were wronged in some way, or that the approver wasn't right, we do have those levels from the time the image was captured. The company itself will review the violation to ensure that their belief is that it's a good violation. And then it comes to my office of approvers that they're the ones that actually would adjudicate any violation in court. And we do toss out quite a bit, but that you would have those levels of review before it actually made it to issuance, and you'd still have the ability to go to court if you wanted to do so.
But I'm sorry, because I think now we're bumping right on exactly my concern. If we have a 7 or 8 lane state highway and it could be divided or undivided, and it becomes a place where people aren't stopping in the crosswalk, and certainly these kinds of places exist. Um, I'm going to say that if there's persistent offenses there, at some point, I want the money to go build a beacon signal there, right?
Mhm.
And um, it's it calls into question, like if you have a median running along the middle, and so there's a pedestrian island in the center, but nevertheless people are not stopping for the vehicles. It seems to me what I'm hearing is maybe you're not going to get a ticket if the person's in the opposite side of the divider. But if they're on your side of the divider and you're not stopping, then you're going to get a ticket. Um, that sounds a little bit opposite to how we handle the school bus scenario. And it's even murkier when there's not a median there, where arguably you might want all of the lanes to stop if there's not a median and someone's going through. But anyway, I think there's enough question here, that I would add this to the scenarios with the pilot as to something we should actually just come to a policy decision on as to what the correct ticketing scenario is, for automated enforcement there. But I guess I'm not convinced that it's necessarily the same as the current in-person tickets, just because I can't clearly articulate that to the public in a way that I think they'll see as a predictable way of behaving.
All right. I just want to refer the committee to Transportation Article Section 21-502. I will circulate that around to the committee members after this discussion. That is the provision in the code that talks about what's supposed to happen with pedestrians in a crosswalk. And basically what it says, and again, we'll have opportunity to discuss this further and decide what we want to do if we move forward with this legislation, whether we want to make it different from or make it directly keyed to this language. But what it says currently in the law is the driver of a vehicle shall come to a stop when a pedestrian crossing the roadway in a crosswalk is either on the half of the roadway on which the vehicle is traveling or approaching from an adjacent lane on the other half of the roadway. Okay. So, I don't know if that makes it clearer or less clear, but we'll have to look into that a little bit and decide whether, whether that's workable. I guess the question is going to be if we wanted to have an automated enforcement system at a crosswalk, do something different than what the current state law says. Or if we want to have it enforce basically what the current state law says, we need to understand what the current state law means.
Can't we require these to go in with a beacon? I mean, doesn't that solve it? And then you just get a ticket if you go in there.
I mean, we can vet that. I guess it's a possibility. Yeah. I mean, while a beacon is not required for these cameras to work, it would be a policy decision of the committee and the General Assembly to decide whether or not they want to do that. But let me just take the question from Vice Chair Wu, who's been patiently waiting with his hand raised as well.
Sure, Mr. Chair. I definitely agree. I think we don't want to really mass scale this implementation, and the pilot program probably is more, I would say, reasonable at this moment. And one question I would think about when we talk about it earlier, we talk about when people approach in the intersection and the crosswalk, and that's kind of very murky. Like if somebody is standing there, they maybe want to cross, maybe not cross, but then there's a car pass by. Does that trigger a ticket or not? Because I don't want our system kind of really over ticket people, right? That's really bad. The intention is really try to increase safety, not for ticketing itself. So I just want to make sure we have a very clear definition for a lot of scenarios, and otherwise you get a lot of backlash from the general public. That's not good for the program either.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I will also note, I think we've had 16 pedestrian deaths in the county in the last, what was it, year? So, I mean, we have to balance these considerations, certainly. Mr. Holland.
Yeah, to Delegate Wu's question. So the pedestrian in the right of way does have to establish it. So even if you have a walk signal, you know, say Chris and I are outside the parking garage and we're chit-chatting near the crosswalk, like we haven't had a right of way until we started to step into the crosswalk. Even just, you know, the tip of your toe has to be out there, and that has now established your right of way. And also to the question about beacons. So we also will look at using this technology at currently signalized intersections as well, because it's actually where we see it, thinking about our downtown areas, where we would have those areas where people are violating pedestrians right of way. So those would not be areas we would put any sort of new flashing beacons or pedestrian hybrid beacons, because we do have those existing traffic signals already in place.
But could we do it? Could we at least require that for an unsignalized, unbeaconed, unsignalized place where we're thinking of deploying this? It seems like it would be a good idea. I mean, especially if the vendor, if it's sort of a self-financing. I mean, I don't know what a beacon costs, to be honest. So it could be that that's a very expensive proposition. But well, we can put a pin in it anyway. I guess that's just it's just a question I have about how we structure the program.
Okay. Wait, is your hand still raised? Okay. That was okay. Any other comments or questions on this or other aspects of the program or the legislation from members of the committee? If not, I just wanted to kind of flag a couple other things to think about, because it sounds like where we're moving right now is we are not going to be taking a vote today, because we need to vet some of these additional ideas and get some language ready for next week, which we will do. But Delegate Moon, on your amendment that you proposed, I just kind of wanted to flag a couple of things, because I remember from our discussion in previous years about the school bus cameras that there was a real challenge in the well-intentioned idea to take the revenue from tickets and put them towards either the specific intersection where the ticket was issued, or if not that, then the intersections that ranked the worst to the most dangerous in the county, and that it was a challenge to sort of limit the county from being able to be more flexible in the use of the revenue. I like the idea of having the revenue be dedicated for purposes of pedestrian safety. But my understanding from the county is that it's challenging to say, all right, we got $1,000, I'm just making that number up, generated in revenue from these tickets after paying out the costs. And it would be more impactful to use that $1,000 put it into a larger pot of money for addressing pedestrian safety in general, versus saying it has to go to these 5 or these 10 intersections, because it wouldn't be enough money anyway to make a real impact on the safety of those intersections. That's my recollection of the discussion we had last time with the school bus cameras.
Yes.
So
that is a key portion of my amendment. Just so the amendment basically tries to take some of the lessons from the school bus camera regulations and say, so there's data you have to report, and I just put some fields in. We might have to, if you guys have different relevant data points that you think should go in there? I'm sure this is just, I have no ownership over this. It's just, I think there needs to be some reporting element in there. But the money is a very tricky problem because while I hear that, what the county said with school bus cameras, and I imagine what will happen here is, well, we already spend $1 billion a year on pedestrian safety improvements. So it's not like we aren't spending money on that. We are. And it's to places where we think it's important, and there's incidents. All that's well and good, but that doesn't change that I believe, especially if we do a limited location pilot, you're going to have exactly the scenario that we have with the school bus cameras, which is you now have school bus stops generating $500,000 a year in fine revenue and not a penny spent on doing anything to make that school bus stop any safer. And in this scenario, one of the reasons I want the data in there is because I want to know what the conditions of the locations look like before we start ticketing. Is there a signal there? Is there a beacon? Is there an elevated crosswalk? Are there pylons? Is there a beg button? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if there are not, then, and we're ticketing and we're generating revenue there, some of those are very low cost options and some of them are not. I certainly would not find it a satisfying response to just take on the word of the county that there's going to be incidents there no matter what. They've got other things they're working on elsewhere. I would want, if a specific crosswalk is generating a high number of offenses, we've deemed it a dangerous stop that warrants tickets. And it seems strange to me that we could come back 4 years after a pilot and spend $0 after generating money off of what is perceived to be a dangerous crosswalk. And again, I've laid out quite a number of things that some cost little money and some cost none, or a lot of money. And if you look to the maximum of what might happen at some of these crosswalks, some of them might want signalization or a stop sign or something like that, right? There's just a large list of things you could do to make that crosswalk safer. And so it seems hard for me to justify why we wouldn't make those stops safer and allow the county to just take the revenue, leave that crosswalk as is, and just keep collecting money there, unless I'm missing something.
No, I appreciate all of that. I guess my point was operationally, is it somehow ineffective?
There's something in the middle.
Something in the middle, right?
There's something in the middle of you must build a signal at Muddy Branch and Old Georgetown or whatever. There's got to be something between that and no, this is too difficult. We can't figure it out. We'll just use the money for whatever.
No, I think that's a fair observation, and I guess my point is simply that the types of systems for improving safety that are listed in your amendment are really illustrative. It's not limited to those. It's not saying that the county must do these things. We don't want to micromanage the county in doing those things, but at the same time, we want to make sure that there's some accountability for measurably improving and investing in those pedestrian crossings that are deemed unsafe by the data.
And that we're specifically not allowing the county to leave in place a hazardous condition that it's making money off of without trying to make that hazardous condition go away. That I just find that crazy that we have so many systems set up like that.
Okay. Mr. Holland, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, in terms of discussion, one place to look at is, Delegate Solomon's bill on the HIN speed cameras from last year, where we did carve out that they should be spent. We didn't say it had to be, if it's on Shady Grove Road, it has to be spent on Shady Grove Road, but we did say you identified these high entry networks. So as you accumulate dollars from those speed cameras, it must go into these types of, we said, study, design, construction on those same types of high entry network corridors. So it gave us a defined area where they would be in. It didn't say has to be these devices or this things, as it needs to be for safety. It needs to be in this kind of zoned approach.
Do those corridors and networks that you identify in your plans also include pedestrian crossing, like uh, high issue or whatever you call it, or high impact pedestrian crossing areas that need to be attended to?
Yeah, so it can be a mix of either there's a infrastructure question we have there, or it is an enforcement question. So I know, think about like our red light camera program. I think most drivers hopefully know red means now to stop, but we still have, you know, tens of thousands of violations for red lights. And we also do ask, you know, we ask MCDOT and SHA if there are things, signal timing, other things that help us mitigate those red light violations in terms of the engineering and timing. But at the end of the day, it's also a responsibility of the drivers to know the law and obey the law. So we always see those as hand in hand. So similar as Delegate Moon's mentioning, you know, we don't want to just throw up a camera and say, all right, let's turn it on, see what the violations are. Because also what the nice thing about these automated enforcement programs is they give us a ton of data as well to help us inform some of the engineering decisions that can be made by the state or the county.
Yeah, no, I mean, I asked this question because I'm just sort of brainstorming here on the spot whether that might be a limiting principle for purposes of spending the revenues collected from these types of systems, without necessarily saying that the revenue must be spent at that exact intersection, but maybe it's pedestrian crossings identified as problematic in the high incident plan. If that is in fact something that is reflected in the plan that could be used. I don't know. I'm just sort of
I
brainstorming.
guess the problem, Mr. Chair, the problem I'm having here is that, you know, a speed zone like, you know, River Road or something as a speed area, that's at least miles of road. So I could see, you know, you're not going to solve speeding on River Road if you deal with this one intersection here. But we're talking about just one crosswalk or just one bus stop, right? In the school bus situation. It's a little bit different. Like, the dangerous condition is people not stopping at that particular intersection. And so it seems to me that localized responses are more feasible for some types of photo enforcement than others. And anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. You know, we're nearing
Yeah.
an hour, and I think we're clearly into next week on this.
Yeah,
So.
look, we're having an important conversation about all these different little policy and operational implications. So I think it's a really good conversation. It's going to help us crystallize what the committee is willing to move forward and exactly what language we need for that. I think to Delegate Moon's earlier point, my sense is that there's a will in the committee to want to move something forward. We just need to figure out what we can all get consensus behind. So let's take what we've discussed. Let's try to distill it down to suggestions for different amendment language, additional amendment language, however we want to handle it, with an aim toward hopefully in the next week being ready to take some votes on some amendments next week and move something forward on this. And I will continue to have dialogue with each of the members of the committee individually this week to make sure that we are on track to do that. But if you all have other questions or concerns or specific ideas for language or limiting factors that we can use, we'll try to work through that and have something ready for prime time next week. Any other comments from members of the committee on this or anything else? All right. Please be on the lookout for any emails from me or from Ralph or Victor on the outcomes of this discussion so that we can all be ready to hopefully move on some things next week. And we will plan to meet next Monday at noon as usual. And I think with that, we are adjourned.